Blood still clung to his fingers as Lwazi stepped into the alleyway behind Park Station, the sounds of early Johannesburg rising around him like smoke. It was a city that never truly slept. It only shifted between masks. Morning brought a new face. Tired workers dragging their shoes across broken pavements, school children with mismatched socks, minibus taxis groaning through tight corners. But beneath all of that, the undercurrent of danger pulsed steady, always there, like a drum no one wanted to hear too closely. Lwazi walked with the silence of a man used to disappearing. His boots hit the concrete with purpose, but no urgency. The blood on his sleeve had dried by now, brown and rusted, a silent reminder of what he had just done only an hour ago in a parking lot on Commissioner Street. The job had been clean, quick, no witnesses, no noise. Just a message delivered on behalf of Baba Vuyo, the shadowed man who ruled Johannesburg's criminal spine with whispers and bullets. But here, in this small back street between life and limbo, Lwazi became someone else, a man who bought flowers every Friday morning. She was already there when he arrived. Amina stood behind her makeshift stall, a quiet figure framed by sunlight and color. Her hijab was always a shade of something soft, sky blue today, and her cart was overflowing with blooms that danced in the morning breeze. Tulips, daisies. But Lwazi only ever bought the lilies, white, simple, the kind people placed at graves or weddings. He never explained why, and she never asked. She didn't need to. Amina's presence was like standing near warm bread on a cold morning. She didn't know who he was, not really. She called him Mr. Flowers, and smiled. Every time she saw him, that smile, gentle and constant, had become a kind of ritual for Lwazi. A small cleansing before he returned to the life that waited for him in alleyways and tinted window cars. He watched her wrap the lilies in yesterday's newspaper, the ink, staining her fingers slightly. She always folded it carefully, like she was wrapping a gift rather than a bouquet. She tied it with a thin strand of jute string and handed it over with both hands. Every week, she said the same thing. Take care of yourself. And every week, Lwazi nodded. He never said much. Words had long become tools in his trade, not gifts. But inside him, something stirred every time he walked away with that small bundle of life in his arms. It was not love, not yet. But it was peace, which for him was rarer. Lwazi never stayed long. He would buy, he would nod, and then vanish. But Amina had noticed things. How he looked over his shoulder too often. How his jaw stayed clenched even when the morning was quiet. How he always paid with a fresh, flat 100 Rand note, never needing change. She noticed the slight tremble in his left hand sometimes, like his body remembered things he wouldn't say. But still, she smiled. That Friday was like any other, except it wasn't. Because Amina saw the red. It was faint, drying into the black, leather of his jacket, barely visible under the slant of morning sun. But she saw it. Her fingers paused mid-fold. Her eyes flicked up, searching his face. For a second, the quiet between them stretched long. Lwazi, for the first time in their ritual, hesitated. He saw the shift in her, how her eyes narrowed, how the smile slipped just a little. But she said nothing. She handed him the lilies, and he walked away. That night, Johannesburg whispered. On TV sets in Shisanyamas and bars, on cracked radios in taxis, on phones under bed covers, a name floated into the air like smoke. Suspected gunman in the Commissioner Street daylight. Hit has been identified. Police warn the suspect is armed and dangerous. He is considered a key enforcer for Baba Vuyo's organization, known on the street as the Shadow. The CCTV still was grainy, but Amina knew. She knew the eyes. That slight tilt of the head, the way he walked, her breath caught in her chest. She dropped a vase on her bedroom floor, water and glass spilling across the wooden panels like a scream. She didn't sleep. She stared at the lilies in the corner of the room. Pure, white, silent, and thought about all the mornings he had come to her with blood still cooling beneath his nails. And the worst part wasn't fear. It was heartbreak. She wasn't foolish. She had grown up in Hillbrow. She knew men like Lilies existed, but she had let herself believe he was different. That maybe, just maybe, something in her could change something in him. Not save him. Just soften him. Like water does to stone over time. But she didn't know he was a killer. The next morning, her cart was gone. No daisies, no tulips, no lilies, just an empty patch of sidewalk. And Lilies? He stood in the alley where they always met, hands tucked into his jacket. The same 100 Rand note folded in his palm. But there was no smile waiting for him. No soft hijab colors. Only silence. And for the first time, Lilies felt something deep in his chest crack open. Not regret, not guilt, but loss. He realized then, it was never just about buying flowers. It was about borrowing a piece of a life he could never earn. The city didn't care that he was broken. Johannesburg moved on, fast and loud. Traffic still screamed down Empire Road. Music still thumped from apartment windows. The rhythm of hustle and crime beat steady in the veins of the streets. But for Lilies, time had buckled. Each second felt like glass dragging through flesh. Every echo of her voice, every faded image of her soft eyes in the morning sun cut him deeper than any bullet he'd ever dodged. He tried to carry on like nothing. Had changed. He showed up at meetings with the gang, wore his usual silence like a mask, nodded at orders. But something inside him had shifted. Quietly, dangerously. The kind of shift that doesn't shout, but breaks everything it touches. You slipping? Boy, Sibusiso growled one night, his voice thick with beer and suspicion. He was one of Baba Vuyo's lieutenants, a man who enjoyed killing too much, even for their world. Job on Bree Street. You hesitated. Lilies didn't answer. He just lit a cigarette and stared out the warehouse window. His silence, once respected, now felt like a threat. Sibusiso stepped closer, his boots echoing on the cracked concrete. You thinking too much. That's how men die, or get others killed. Lilies turned slowly. His eyes were cold again, but the tiredness was there, like smoke behind glass. I'll handle it. But even he didn't believe himself, because Amina haunted him. Not like a ghost, but like a question that wouldn't leave. What had she seen in him before she knew the truth? What did she see now? And why did her leaving feel worse than any wound he'd ever taken? He returned to the alley. Every Friday, the flower cart never came back, weeks passed, then months. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon, something strange happened. He found a flower, one single lily, tucked into the broken slats of the bench across from where her stall used to be, wrapped in newspaper, folded with care. No note, no message, just the lily. Lilies stood there for a long time, his heart thudding uneven in his chest. He looked around, no sign of her. The streets were loud as ever, but in that moment, everything went quiet. He picked up the lily, held it like it might crumble. The newspaper wrap was clean, fresh, the kind she always used. Was it from her? He didn't know, but it was enough to light something small inside him. He began looking, not for her, not directly. That would only drive her further into hiding. But he started asking around, discreetly, carefully. He slipped questions into conversations at barber shops, left bigger, tips at cafes she used to walk past. He even visited the mosque on Mint Road one afternoon, sitting outside during Friday prayers, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. She was nowhere, but he kept the lily. He placed it in water in a cracked glass jar in his apartment. The same room, where weapons once lined the walls. Now, slowly, the arsenal was disappearing. guns sold off, ammunition cases sealed and buried. Even his knife, the one with a carved handle from his first kill, was gone. And the lily stayed. It died slowly, as lilies do, but he didn't throw it away. He let it decay, petal by petal, until it was nothing but a withered curl at the bottom of the jar. It was a reminder of something delicate, something true, and something lost. The gang noticed. Lilies's gone soft. Someone muttered at a warehouse gathering one night. He's reading books now, drinking tea, doesn't talk about work, doesn't smile. He never smiled, someone else replied. But the truth was undeniable. He wasn't the shadow anymore. He was just a man. And then the order came down. "Take him out," Baba Vuyo's voice said on the encrypted call. Quietly, no blood on the streets, but he's a liability now. Sibusiso grinned when he heard it, with pleasure. Lilies heard too. He wasn't stupid. He'd lived too long in the dark not to feel it when the walls began to close. His phone went silent. Meetings were moved without telling him. The woman at the stash house stopped answering his calls. Even the mechanics who cleaned his car suddenly avoided his eyes. He knew they were coming, and for the first time in his life, he didn't care. Because he had made a decision. Not to run. Not to fight, but to end it. The right way. He dressed in the cleanest shirt he owned, pressed slacks, no weapons, just the lily jar, now empty, held carefully in a brown paper bag. He walked to the police station on Loveday Street at dusk, just as the sun broke into a final burn above the skyline. People passed him, unaware, uninterested, as the most dangerous man in the city walked himself into surrender. Inside, the officers looked up, confused. "I'm here to confess," he said, voice quiet. "To what?" Lilies placed the jar gently on the counter. His voice didn't shake. "To everything." They didn't believe him at first. Who would? But when he gave names, addresses, codes, the room shifted. Phones rang, chairs scraped. Doors slammed. They led him away in cuffs, and for the first time in years, he slept without a gun under his pillow. In prison, days moved slow, thick and heavy, but they didn't crush him. Lilies worked in the garden, planted seeds with his calloused hands, watched them grow. Tomatoes, mint, a few sunflowers. He spoke little, but when he did, it was honest. He wrote letters he never sent. He thought of Amina. And then, one morning, 3 years later, a guard handed him a small package. Inside was a lily, wrapped in clean newspaper, tied with jute string. No note, just the flower. There are silences in prison that feel louder than screams. Lilies sat in the sunlit corner of the prison yard, his hands deep in the soil, dirt under his fingernails, and his breath steady. 3 years had passed, but he measured time differently. Now, not in hours or days, but in growth. In how the mint spread wider each week. In how the tomatoes turned from pale green to deep red. In how the single sunflower near the wall always turned its face toward the smallest crack of morning light. And now, there was the lily. It sat on the small windowsill above his bed, alive, fresh, a reminder of something that had not died, or maybe something that had returned. Every morning he stared at it before the guards banged on the metal door. He didn't know where it had come from. No note, no name. But deep in his gut, he knew. Amina. The idea of her, not just the memory, had become something sacred inside him. He hadn't seen her, hadn't heard her voice, but he felt her presence in the quiet things, in the way the garden softened his fists, in the way he had started humming under his breath, in the way the nightmares no longer clawed at him every night. He had stopped being the shadow. Now, he was just Lilies. One morning, as he trimmed dead leaves from the garden bed, a new face arrived. A woman. Sharp suit, dark braids tied back, no-nonsense stare. Not a lawyer, not a guard. She was different. "Loisy," she said, standing over him like a judgment. "I'm with the Victim Restoration Council." He nodded, slowly wiping his hands on his trousers. "You're here for the checklist?" "No," she replied, sitting on the bench across from him. "I'm here for her." His heart lurched. "I'm not here to pressure you. But Amina has agreed to meet. Not as a reconciliation. Not yet. Just to listen." Loisy stared at the soil. It was wet with morning dew, dark and rich. He dug his fingers into it, grounding himself. "When?" "Tomorrow. Visitor's wing. 10 minutes. He didn't sleep that night. He sat on his bunk, hands folded, breathing steady. He didn't imagine what she would look like now, didn't plan. What to say? There was no script for this, no strategy, just truth. The next morning, he walked into the visitor room like a man facing a final trial. And there she was, Amina. Her face had changed, not older, but quieter. Her eyes held weight. Not anger, not hatred, but distance. Her hijab was green today, wrapped with the same care he remembered. Her hands rested on the table, fingers still and calm. Neither spoke for the first few seconds. They just watched each other, time folding in on itself. Then, softly, she broke the silence. "You left the gang." He nodded. "You confessed everything?" "Yes." "Why?" He took a breath. His voice came low, worn, but clear. "Because I wanted to stop stealing other people's peace." She didn't look away. Her eyes searched his, not for lies, but for cracks. "You think peace is enough?" "No," he said. "But it's a beginning." A long silence passed. Then Amina leaned forward, just a little. Her voice was steady. "You know, I never ran because I was afraid you'd hurt me." Loisy blinked. His fingers curled slightly against the table's edge. "I ran," she continued, "because I knew if I stayed, I would have tried to save you. And I couldn't carry the weight of your crimes with you. That's not love. That's drowning." His throat tightened. "I watched that news report," she said, "and I broke. Because the man who bought flowers from me smiled. He was kind. I thought I imagined it all." "You didn't," he whispered. "And then, when I saw you turned yourself in." She paused, breath catching. "That's when I knew I wasn't wrong. That maybe, just maybe, there was something real under all that blood." A tear slid down her cheek. Not from pain, but release. "I needed to heal without you. I needed to find myself again." He nodded. "I understand. But Loisy," she said gently, "you don't owe me redemption." His eyes met hers. "You owe yourself the kind of life no one has to run from." She stood then, slowly, the moment folding shut. Her bag rested over her shoulder. Her steps were soft. At the door, she turned. "One day," she said, "when your hands grow something, more than death, bring me a lily." And she left. 5 years had passed. Loisy no longer counted time in prison walls or visiting hours. He counted it in the changing of seasons in the prison garden, in how the soil felt under his fingers, in the way his hands, once trained for killing, now moved gently, coaxing life from dead earth. He had stopped being called the Shadow. Now the younger inmates called him Maloom, like an uncle, a man who spoke when needed and worked when the world wasn't looking. In his cell, there were no posters, just a small wooden shelf he had carved himself, holding a Quran, a worn poetry book, and an empty glass jar, where the lily used to be. Some nights, he'd sit by the barred window, staring at the moon through chipped glass. He didn't imagine freedom. He didn't dream of second chances. He had come to understand that redemption wasn't about being forgiven. It was about what you did after you were not. His prison record was clean. His name was now part of a gardening rehabilitation program. Every week, he taught inmates how to prune, how to plant seeds, how to be patient, how the earth forgives slowly, but it does forgive if you come with open hands. And then, one morning, something unexpected happened. He was called into the warden's office. "You've been granted early release," the warden said without looking up from the file. "Your record, testimony, and community work. Someone wrote a letter on your behalf, said you'd changed more men inside these walls than they had on the outside." Lwazi blinked. "Who?" The warden shrugged. "Didn't say. Came with flowers, though." On the table was a single lily in a vase. His heart stopped. The world outside was louder than he remembered. When they opened the gates, he stood for a while just breathing in the air. The city had changed. New buildings, new taxis, new graffiti. But some things remained. The rhythm of life, the rush of people, the smell of petrol and fried meat. And somewhere in it all, he walked. He didn't go home. There was no home to return to. The old apartment had been sold. His gang, what remained of it, was scattered or buried. He walked with no direction, only instinct, until he found himself back on that familiar backstreet behind Park Station, the place where the story had started. The old stall space was still there, but someone else now sold clothes there, socks and belts and cell phone chargers. No flowers, no lilies, just the memory of her smile echoing off the walls. He stood there a long time. Then he turned to leave. "Lwazi." The voice came soft, almost carried by the wind. He turned. Amina stood a few paces away. She wore gray this time, her hijab fluttering slightly in the late afternoon breeze. Time had softened her, but hadn't dimmed her. Her eyes were still sharp, not angry, not sad, just clear, strong. Neither of them moved. She stepped forward slowly, holding something in her hand. A flower, a white lily. She offered it without a word. Lwazi took it, hands trembling. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the noise of the world, something passed between them. Not a promise, not a rekindled romance, but recognition of pain, of growth, of shared roots. "I opened a flower shop," she said softly after a long pause. "Real one, near Brixton. I teach kids to grow things, to create." He nodded. "I grow things too. Inmates. Mostly tomatoes." Amina smiled. They stood together, quietly, like two people watching a seed they had both planted finally rise from the earth. "You're not who you were," she said. "And I'm not asking to be who I was," he replied. I want to be useful now." She nodded, then held out a small card. The name of her shop was printed in green ink. "Root and Rise, a place for growing." "If you ever want to help," she said, "come plant something." Then she turned and walked away, the city folding around her like light through leaves. Lwazi looked at the lily in his hand. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something close. He took a deep breath, walked to the nearest park, found a patch of earth, and knelt. He dug with his bare hands, and he planted the lily, not for himself. Not for her, but for what could still grow, even after everything had burned.